Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands. Here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
Gaude Virgo Immaculata Dei Genitrix. Gaudium mihi dona. Gaude que gaudium ab angelo suscepisti, et gaudium visiones divini mihi dona. Gaude que genuisti eterni lumines claritatem. Gaude Dei Genitrix, et gaudium visionis divini mihi dona, ut sub lever de omnibus angustiis et tribulationibus it vitiis meis, quet sunt in corde meo, et ceru amplius, ut tecum sima latere constans, ad videndum me, vivente Deum eternum. Adoro te, Sancta Mater Domini nostri Iesu Christi, et laudo, et magnifico te. Adoro altitudinem tuam. Rejoice, O Immaculate Virgin, Mother of God. Give me joy. Rejoice, you who received the tidings of joy from the angel, and give me the joy of the vision of God. Rejoice, you who brought forth the clarity of eternal light. Rejoice, Mother of God, and give me the joy of the vision of God, that I may be raised up from all my difficulties and tribulations, and the faults which are in my heart. And I ask further, that I may be firmly by your side, foreseeing the living and eternal God. I adore you, O Holy Mother of our Lord, and I praise and glorify you. I adore your exaltation.
Welcome to Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 135 with my good friends and co-hosts, Cabra, Snow, and Emily Streaking Fate. How are you all doing tonight?
I am good. One of my housemates has been a bit ill, and so there is vague concern that it is spreading, because I woke up this morning with a sore throat and a headache. So,
Oh no!
yeah, so ginger tea and lemsip has been fueling me, and lots of water, and sitting, and hiding from the sun, and yeah.
Oh, that dreaded R word.
You were going to hide from the Daystar anyway.
This is true. This is true. I mean, it has been pointed out that my natural sleep cycle, like if I don't have to get up for work or whatever, and I'm not getting up for alarms, my body will naturally just make me like semi-nocturnal. Like I just wake up around midday and then go to sleep at like 3 a.m. Just
fair.
Naturally. So that's one advantage when you're in a long distance relationship with an 8 hour time difference.
That's
It's
awesome,
like,
though.
it's like my body's been preparing for this. How are you, Emily?
I'm doing all right. Sarenth has been healing some more, so having him home has allowed us to do a few more like magical and ritual stuff together. We worked on some bind runes, which was a lot of fun. We did some devotional work at a local war memorial, which was really nice. And I got to start my first fire with flint and steel, which was exciting. Set up a tent in the backyard for a couple of days just to get that sleeping on the ground feel, because it's been a long time since I've been camping. So it's been really busy and a little intense, but also nice to have more time to do things.
If you were camping, I'd hope it was intense.
What about you, Sam?
Well, like Emily said, I've been recovering. I'm finally back to work, whether I want to be or not. Um, I can definitely say that our magic work went off really well because the person that hurt me is no longer there. Um, so that being said, um, a lot of time at home with the kids, a lot of time to be able to just it's basically an enforced vacation where I'm recovering instead of, trying to do everything, which can be a challenge because I still want to do everything, but it's like my shoulders just couldn't handle it. Like when I started, my lower back couldn't handle it either. But um, I'm feeling much more balanced in terms of how I'm approaching things. Um, Generally speaking, with life, the the needing to reassess how much time I actually have and how much energy I actually have has forced me to make decisions that even probably 2 or 3 years ago I probably would have just grit my teeth and bared it. And realizing that that energy actually does need to go to other things. And I've had a hell of a year. It's mostly in the rearview mirror now, right? We're 7 months into this year, but it's been a hell of a year for me, and I I don't want to go through another burnout cycle, so I'm trying to regulate myself, and that when you're used to go 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 all the time, whether it's your schedule or whether it's just life hitting you, and you're used to being the person on point, it can be a bit of a challenge stepping back and going, okay, can I honestly do this and still maintain a decent pace of life? And the answer is no. So a lot of things that I would normally be like, yes, I can take this on and that on, I'm not. So it's a different dynamic in my life than what I'm used to, but it's necessary because I'll end up back here having to recover one way or the other if I don't watch it. So how about you, Cabra?
Practice wise, OTO did in init last weekend, and I had a pretty large amount of work to do for it. So it was fun, it was rewarding, it was a good time. It was also a lot of work. I am taking a step back from writing the seasonal rituals for the next two of them. So the next one that I'm going to be on the hook for is going to be like September 21st. So that'll be good. I'm doing masses. So I'm continuing to like develop in the priest role. And a number of people have already told me in Vesper that we came out of the gate strong because we were here. So we just practiced with each other a lot. And then both of us have really high standards for ourselves on this kind of thing. So we practiced way more than we probably needed to for our very first performance. And now we just have to just do it. Now we just get to do mass. And at some point we'll rack up enough masses and initiations and all of that to hopefully get ordained, unless the Electoral College decides that they hate me. But whatever. I'll make a talisman about it. It'll be fine. What else? I'm cutting back a lot, actually. So we were running these full moon rituals and I'm not getting anything out of them, so I'm not going to run them anymore. I just got to notify that group. Garden is going good. It's been really nice to have sacred herbs. And then I actually had enough time and energy and gumption to finish a talisman I've been wanting to make for a friend of mine who's having troubles with their neighbor for a minute. And I need to do something with the recent Mars-Uranus algal conjunction because it's going to hit my personal chart in 3 different places, or I guess it already came and went. And that completely botched it, right? So like I didn't mix the clay beforehand. So I had the water from a river and I had dried clay that we had consecrated in January from the fridge. And then I put way too much water and then I couldn't get it to like make a shape. So I like made a disc and grabbed a consecrated knife and started putting the things on there. And then it dried funny, but I hoped it had dried enough so that I could give it over. And it had to go in a plastic bag because it smelled weird. And the person I'm giving it to gets migraines from weird smells. And so the minute that it's safe, right, they pull it out of the bag and it just crumbles, like it just cracks in half. So the
Oh
good news is
no.
that it can just get decommissioned by being buried, or I might get it back and see if I can repair it. But I'm getting a pretty strong ping that this is like, good luck, kid, try again next time. But yeah. I also wanted to make an announcement, which is that I will be stepping down as a host on the podcast. I am infinitely grateful for the time that I've been able to be in this position in the community. I'm not going to leave the community. I'm still going to be haunting the astrology chat and
I hope other
giving.
channels as well, I hope.
Oh, yeah, but like mostly the astrology chat. That's where the wizards hang out. But yeah, I'm still going to be, saying hi, checking in on people, you know. The thing that I have found has been a theme for me this year, like I mentioned earlier, is cutting back. So the same way that I need to stop doing these full moon rituals because they're not really doing anything for me, and I need to like stop jumping at every opportunity to help with things at the OTO, I also need to start reassessing whether or not I can really show up for this podcast. And part of it is also, I think, a working style difference. I need structure and I need a very strong sense of like prompt and direction. And one of the things that's really good about this podcast, and one of the reasons why I love it so much, is that Around Grandfather Fire doesn't have a strict definition about what it is. It isn't necessarily a topic or a series of topics. It's a feeling and a community, right? Like that's what the intro says. It's supposed to feel like a bunch of practitioners talking around the sacred fire. And unfortunately for me, it's really hard for me to get my footing on a project that's like, or even just at a task that's so ill-defined. So I think it's better for, at least for me, if I step down. But yeah, if anyone needs anything, I'll be here answering questions. I'm happy to suggest guests and questions for future podcasts. And I
Hell
just
yeah.
really want to say thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you being willing to come on and do so much work, because podcast is work. Uh, whether you're on the mic or whether you're behind the mic doing the editing, whether you're doing modding for the community, this community is work. And I definitely appreciate the time and attention that you've been able to devote to it, especially with all the other amazing things you've got going on. And I appreciate also that you're not just, well, I'm just going to go because I need more energy. I appreciate that you're saying, hey, look, this is what doesn't work for me as far as the podcast format goes. And it's one of the things that is a stark contrast if you do go to Cabra's Steel City Witch YouTube, is that it is very focused and very laser focused on the topics that they have. And which is a completely legitimate criticism and thing to need. Needing that structure is not a bad thing.
Yeah, it definitely isn't. I'm not trying to say that Around Grandfather Fire being less defined is bad.
No.
I really do think that it's just like the chemistry is not there between like my creative process and the way that this podcast gets made.
Which is totally cool. And I appreciate that we can talk about this on the air, because I know we can talk about this behind the scenes because we have that kind of friendship. But I appreciate that we can talk about it bluntly to the audience, because I think this is something that doesn't happen very often, where people like get to see the sausage being made. And there's a lot of, like, when podcasts break apart or when hosts depart, there's a lot of like layers to it, and stuff like this is an important piece of conversation that misses in a lot of the meta narratives we have around why hosts go their separate ways. And I think it's a really important distinction to make.
Yeah, I love that there's space for difference in experience. I love that there's space for difference in process. And I also love, because for me, this also feels like in a space to be accountable, right? Like for me, every single time that I get on the mic and ask a question or try and connect with one of our guests, I'm asking for people's time, if nothing else. And that time is a very big and precious gift for me. Also, I got my own room on the server for like a hot minute. That was great. That was hilarious. I spammed that channel with so many quotes from mystic poets. While I had the energy to do it. And so for me, having that space and that time and attention is definitely like a gift. And I definitely want to leave accountable for what I have done with the space that I have been given, and also accountable for letting the community know that like I'm still in it to win it. Like I'm here for the long haul, because this is a really good community and there's a lot of down to earth practitioners. And it's so rare to see an interfaith space work so well. So yeah, I'm grateful also for the ability to be accountable and public about why I have to step down.
Yeah, no, I want to thank you for the time and energy and effort you have been able to bring as a co-host to the show so far. And I'm sure we'll probably all say this again sort of at the end when we're wrapping up anyways. But thank you for being Cabra. So,
Yeah, I want to echo that. Zach, thank you for everything that you've given. You've given so very much. And I would not be the least surprised if we have you on again as a future guest in the future for maybe an astrology or a topic that specifically interests you, and you can go on and on and on about it. You have given so much of yourself to the community, and you've done so much priestly work, I think, as part of this community. And I appreciate the time and the energy that you've given. And I look forward to your future stuff, both in the astrology channel and in your other areas of life. Thank you.
Y'all are too cute. I'm gonna explode.
I before we do go our separate ways, I also want to appreciate what a grounded perspective and what a different perspective you brought to the show, and I appreciate the hell out of that. Whether it was your Steel City Witch perspective, your perspective as a Thelemite, your perspective in reclaiming witchcraft, all of these things add to the texture of our community, add to the wisdom of our community, add to the understanding and the knowledge and the beauty in our community. And I really appreciate you in many ways being so vulnerable as a person in the community, on this show and on the server. These are not easy things to do. These are not easy things to be. And I'm going to miss you on the show. And I appreciate that you're doing the best thing for you.
Yeah. Thank you for all your kind words. And also like I'm not leaving without a little bit of like my own sadness and regret about it, because there's definitely like there were a couple more episodes that I really wanted to do that I like just am not going to get to. I really wanted to have the USGL historian on to talk about, weirdly enough, to talk about Crowley and queerness, because he has been doing some like really interesting research. But I don't know when he is going to be ready, or if he's ever going to be ready. And my attempts to find somebody who has the same breadth and depth of knowledge that he has have been difficult. So yeah, it's there's a couple others that I did definitely want to do. Like I definitely wanted to have a Snow and Cabra torture Sarenth with astrology, but I also wanted to actually give at some point there's this weird little there's this weird little pearl that's like floating around in the space somewhere of like, how do you actually explain astrology in neo-pagan sort of understanding in a way that actually makes it more accessible? Because there's some parts of astrology that are inaccessible, but I could go on for an hour anyway.
I want
But
you
yeah.
to come back for that. I do want to be part of a Snow and Cabra torture Sarenth with astrology, because there's so much that I don't know. And when I hear any of the three of you say something like, oh yeah, that's conjunct with Saturn, and that, like, that sounds like it should have some oil on it or something.
I just want to say I wish for the audience that they were in this call right now so that everyone could see just how gleeful Emily looks every time we talk about torturing Sarenth. Never has anyone looked so happy.
It just brings such joy to me because when I have tried to talk astrology to Sarenth before, and their reaction is sometimes amusing, sometimes confusing, but always entertaining.
Thanks, hon.
It's just an orchestra, and you're sitting there with your tambourine, and you just have to figure out when to shake your tambourine. That's it. It's not more complicated than that.
Okay.
Are you bad at rhythm games?
I'm actually not. I'm actually really good at rhythm games. I'm not good at math. And astrology seems
Music
to have
is math. Music is geometry across time instead of across space.
You know what this reminds me of is the conversation a while back that Snow and I had on me not being a heathen alchemist.
Oh yeah, when you talked yourself into it after saying you weren't.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was a good
I
time.
It might be approach. It might be approach. So yeah, I think we should still make plans to do this. If not this year, then next.
I'll be around.
Awesome.
And I still have the mic and I still have a computer.
Yes.
So I'm obviously with my schedule, it's hard to pin me down, but I'm definitely like willing and able.
Okay, cool. You heard it here, folks. We're gonna have at least 2 episodes where we digest information about astrology, and for those of you who get to watch me on Patreon, you'll have the joy of watching me make faces and my eyes glassing over at points because concepts are hard.
So, whilst we're all still here, we all have microphones and computers and are all still willing and able, and concepts are hard. Do we want to dive into today's topic?
Yes, please.
Yes, absolutely.
So, the suggestion for today's discussion, given it is the 4 of us and Cabra's last episode, was basically sort of sex and gender, which is a massive topic in and of itself. So how it relates to us, our practices, our religious and spiritual identities, and how these things inform each other. So the first thing that I'd got noted down was how people are encountering those as being different and the attitudes towards them as being different within our communities as compared to the world at large out there. So what thoughts do people have on that?
I mean, the Lema was founded by a disaster bisexual who may or may not have been gender fluid. And I know online Thelemites are your mileage will vary, but with the people I've met in person, very few of us are cis-hets. Like we're all some kind of a little, just a little, right? And so it's just in the air, it's around. I 90% of the time I feel perfectly fine inviting other people who are members of the Rainbow Mafia into mass if they want to come. So it's just bone deep in the system.
I'm sorry, you said that Curly was a disaster bisexual, and the first thing that came to mind was I wonder if he oriented his candle colors around the bisexual lighting.
The original bisexual lighting
Exactly.
is a bunch of candles around your ritual space.
It's not a dumpster fire. It's a ritual fire.
Oh yeah.
Oh, gods.
I mean, one thing that might be a dumpster fire that could potentially take up the entirety of the rest of the episode would be heathenry grappling with LGBTQ plus inclusivity.
Oh, my gods.
Uh, I think that's very much a places either are okay with it or they're really, really not. And I, from my experience, I don't know what Sarenth and Emily might say from their experiences, both online and offline. But from my experiences, a lot of that is very much informed by sort of where people are in the world generally, anyways. And so if they're living in a state or a country where maybe the people are a bit more accepting or coming from a background where people are more accepting of things there, then that's informing their heathenry. And if not, then it's not.
Yeah, I think it depends on which pagan groups or types of occultism you look. I like to think that there's a bit more acceptance in paganism and occultism in general for queer people. Uh I am definitely a disaster bisexual, and most of my friends are somewhere in the LGBTQ community. However, I do know that there are groups that are just as biased against LGBTQ within paganism and occultism as without. I also think there is a bit more nuanced bias in some pagan groups. Like they'll have the male and female roles and say that they're completely open to LGBTQ, but not really think about how non-binary or homosexuality might fit into the schema of the ritual. Um, for my personal practice, I haven't had an issue, although because I am AFAB, there are certain parts of some of my traditions that request that I don't do certain practices when I am on my period,
Mhm.
if I'm actively bleeding. And I find that to be interesting. And initially, I took a lot of offense at that. But out of respect for my traditions and also a realization that I am in a different place, there are other things that I feel are useful for me to do in that period. For me, there are sometimes spiritual and magical things that I still like to do, but there are some things that I realize because I do think it's a different place than I am when I'm not. There are some things that I will shy away from. But I do find that part specifically to be a bit more of a challenge for me, a struggle to see, is this something that um is a useful part of my practice and I think is a good part of the tradition, or is this something that I think came from patriarchy or misogyny? That's always a struggle, I think, for everybody to look when they look at their practices. But those are more like not heathenry specific things. Um, Sarenth, you probably could talk a lot about gender bending and heathenry and your thoughts.
uh, at length. I came into heathenry back in the early aughts, and there was still a very sharp divide in the community between folks who were accepting of queer folks, folks who didn't quite fit one gender or another, or one gender stereotype or another. And then there were entire sections of the community. And I think the last 20 years has been rather revolutionary, especially in this regard, because there's a lot more acceptance of outwardly being um, unbound by I must look a certain way, I must dress a certain way. Like I know that the joke around a lot of the jewelry I wear is that I'm basically being a Grimfrost guy. I'm wearing the hot topic of heathenry, and I'll cop to that. That's fine. Um, but back when I first started, it was a lot of stupidly huge Mjolnirs Like the Mjolnir I'm wearing is nowhere near as big or as excessive as some of the other ones that were around, just as a penis measuring device for some of these guys. And usually it was guys wearing the hubcap sized Mjolnirs.
It always makes me think of when the Beastie Boys were massive and all of a sudden all Mercedes-Benz had the logos taken off the hood so people could wear them on chains around their necks. It always makes me think of that when you see those giant Mjolnirs around people's necks.
Yes. Yeah. And especially because when I came in the early aughts, a lot of magic was completely stratified between the genders. Like men did Galder, women did Sather, and if you were queer, I guess we can, if the group would tolerate you. And back then it was tolerance. It wasn't like this for a lot of the people that I was running into at the time. It was tolerance, not full-throated acceptance. Not these are accomplices, not.
Well,
Go ahead.
back up a second. I was introduced to Galder many years ago, and I have occasionally participated in it if I'm like sending energy to a friend who's heathen or it comes up here, there, and the other thing. I was supposed to be a dude for that.
Right? Fucking weird.
I think it's really hilarious that once again, the actual magical genders are Magus, Scryer, and Scribe, and I am still the guy with the big pointy thing, like in every universe. It's hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, there's also a lot more dialogue in the community about what ergi means to us in a modern context, what queerness means in a modern context, and reflecting on our heathen forebears or arch-heathens, as they're sometimes called. There's been so much work the last 20 years that to go over it exhaustively would be like an episode or two into itself. So to not belabor the point, we've come a long way out of the binary, and I'm so fucking happy because there's finally room for weird fags like me to actually fully express themselves as opposed to being locked into one gender binary or another.
So a couple of thoughts I've had as you guys were talking just now. One, with regards to ergi, I saw a colleague make the point that ergi, much like the word queer in mainstream culture, you're always going to get people who aren't okay with it, and you're always going to get terms being co-opted. You're always going to get people who are still finding these terms offensive. So it's just kind of navigating that as you go, really. Nothing's ever going to be perfect and please everybody. So a lot of that's just letting people use the terms they find work for them. And then two thoughts I had while Emily was talking there. You reminded me of a conversation I was having with one of my housemates, actually, where she isn't directly involved with sort of the communities we are, but is more aware of sort of greater pagandom out there. So more kind of whatever's happening on YouTube or TikTok, or seeing the Llewellyn published books on bookshelves in Waterstones or whatever. And from what she was saying, in her observations, everyone is still pretty much running with 90s, early noughties, divine masculine, divine feminine Wicca. And so I think in a way that kind of points to how ghettoized or how sort of much we can be in bubbles with these kinds of things, and how opaque those bubbles can see, and we're not necessarily realizing what everyone else is doing or how far everyone else has come, when we think we've come X distance and then look outside and go, oh, actually everyone's still kind of at this point, which is kind of interesting. That's
a really good. No, I just wanted to say that's a really fucking good point, because when you get communities like this one where we're not only queer accepting, we're queer celebrating, it's a bit of a shock to look outside and go, why aren't you fuckers all with the program?
To
I think
piggy. Oh, go ahead, Cabra.
No, I talk too much.
I was just gonna say, to piggyback on what Snow was saying, I think it also matters depending on what community you're in. People will share certain viewpoints or hold back certain viewpoints that might be different from the group, because they don't want to appear to disagree with the group. And so I find that interesting too, because I know in the past I have been in some groups where I haven't been as open about some parts of my own practice, because I felt like it was it would not be accepted by the group. And so I was like just checking them out or spending time with them and didn't feel comfortable like expressing certain parts of my practice or certain viewpoints. And that can go both ways. People can appear more progressive than they actually are, or people can appear more conservative when it comes to LGBTQ stuff than they actually are, depending on how safe they feel in the group. Go ahead, Cabra.
I mean, I feel like the conversation shifted, but I think talking about the compartmentalization of pagandom a lot is a drum I've been beating for a while now, that we have a problem where it is very difficult to get experienced mentorship to people who are entering this sphere. And it's something that has been bothering me for a really long time. And it's been bothering me because it's institutional and we don't always talk about it. But think about it. When are people most likely to actually start exploring their spirituality? College. So in theory, what we should be able to do is to have college outreach from established pagan communities. And I've known people who've gone and tried to do that. And the number of times that the measuring stick for whether or not you get to go and provide accredited mentorship to curious college students who are at a great age for exploring themselves, even if they don't become pagan, it's are you a rich Christian? Over and over and over again, these litmus tests. Are you a rich Christian? Are you a rich Christian? Are you a rich Christian? And it just makes it incredibly difficult. And then if we are thinking about how to hold mentors accountable for being good to their mentees in communities that are often like so small and so underfunded and like so anti-institution for completely valid reasons, it just kind of complicates the problem further. And so now we run into a problem where in 2024, we have like 2 points of entry for people. And one is the bookstore that, as Snow pointed out, may end up having outdated material or material that's not particularly useful compared to what we have now. And people who end up on the internet in these giant piles of stolen PDFs where it's like, cool, 1 or 2 of these books is probably relevant to this person. How are they, starting from 0, supposed to know which one to actually spend their time on? And how are they going to skip past the 10 to 15 in this pile that they really do not want to be reading without it being contextualized properly? But this is like, I'm on this war zone.
Warpath.
Loktar!
Yeah.
I'm on this warpath. This is the hill on which I am planting my flag.
A flag of many colors. Yeah, the other thing, I've been reading Sacred Gender by Ariana Serpentine, which is a great book, and I would recommend it to everybody vaguely into pagandom and vaguely into sort of interested in inclusivity and pagandom and queerness and all that stuff. It's a great book. I've been sort of going slow with it because I want to sort of soak it in and digest it properly. But a part that I just sort of recently finished reading was on community, where she was saying, if you look at a community and everyone there is very much cishet, then ask yourselves why that might be. And maybe that is an amber flag in and of itself. In the same way that if you're looking around and everyone there is very clearly white, that may very well also be an amber flag, and sort of ask why that may be. And then thinking about language. So are you using terms like masculine and feminine when something else might be more accurate and might be more meaningful? So if you're talking about religious things or you're talking about mythical things, you're speaking in metaphor or allegory. Are you talking about something giving and something receiving? Well, then would the words giving and receiving be more appropriate than masculine or feminine? And sort of things like that. And that gets really interesting.
Yeah, I find a lot of these discussions, so the institution thing is something that I've been beating my drum in different ways over the years on, and it really it comes down to, formal versus informal, because we have institutions of some kind or another. The gender institutions that we are stuck with from the 90s and we are breaking and dissolving are things we're having to actively grapple with. And maybe institution is probably the incorrect term here, but I'm using it as kind of like an entry point. I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with the institutionalization movement within the greater Pagandom, because I've seen how damaging it can be when a charismatic institution, where there is a head, a charismatic person who holds the whole thing together, and the thing breaks apart, whether it's because they burn out or they do something horrid. I mean, I've seen plenty of institutional charismatic figures in Pagandom where they didn't do anything horrible. They just couldn't support the structure underneath them, while also trying to pull all these different factors at the same time.
And I have a solution to this one.
Go for it.
Which I think you will like, because Reclaiming solved this problem. The thing is, instead of having it be an institution, you do it the same way that Linux manages itself, right? The same way that open source manages itself. You put together a standard, and anyone who agrees to that standard is able to play with it as much as possible. And anyone who uses the standard is allowed to send a representative anytime there is a meeting to figure out if we need to update the standard. And so a really great example of a rule that we have in Reclaiming is nobody ever teaches alone, is always in teams of at least 2. Any workshop that you want to run in Reclaiming has to have at least 2 teachers. And in order to teach a core class specifically, you have to have taken it once, you have to student teach it once, and then you can co-teach it, and then you can lead teach it, which means you have to have a list of classes that you can rattle off. And because Reclaiming is such a small community, if you go, oh yeah, I took Elements of Magic with like this many times with these many teachers, and then I student taught it with Vesper Amanita in January of 2024. So now I can co-teach it. I don't need a lead teacher. Like you have to be able to rattle off names and times and so show like some amount of stuff. Like here's the registration paperwork that we got from our people, that the data has been anonymized, but you can see here that we actually did do this thing, right? So you leave a paper trail, you have a standard, and anyone who puts themselves on the standard can do it. The same way that that's how a lot of computing runs. There's so many open source projects where it's not that there's an institution running the project, it's that anyone who has a stake in the system gets to come together, and then we all just decide, because otherwise the literal world stops moving, to be adults about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. It works. I mean, that's basically what the original purpose of a jury for dissertation papers is supposed to do. You're supposed to be able to get in front of this panel of people that have taken the same kinds of classes you have and are a group of your peers that'll judge your work. We have plenty of institutions that already do this, and they work. Mm-hmm. Reclaiming Witchcraft, that wouldn't hurt for a lot of other communities to adopt. That's a really damn.
But we'll never be able to get it to work, because if you go to a university that's used to rich Christians come in, and people who can make themselves look like rich Christians, right?
Right.
Even though they don't always pass muster, right? We go up and we're like, this is how we make sure that we are sending you people who can actually be trusted with your student body. Here's the number of years of experience they've had. Here's what they've done. Here's a whole CV. We have a paper trail. We have a procedure. We have a standard. They're going to look at that and be like, but what's your governing body? And we're going to be like, we all just decided to not be jerks is the governing body.
Right.
I mean,
meanwhile, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and then to sort of tie some of these points together, if you're looking at a religious community or a pagan group or a group of occultists or what have you, if whether it's hierarchical or very much egalitarian, if you're seeing a variety of people who are across the sort of LGBTQ plus spectrum in some of those sort of positions of authority, positions of leadership, leading ritual, making decisions, having that presence there, then that can be really important for sort of having someone there so that it's sort of visibly something that people see as something to aspire to, or they know that it's possible, and also having that relatability there. So the next thing that we'd got written down was have people found in your life, your religious, spiritual, magical lives, that your sex or gender has informed your practice and or worldview? And if so, how? Go.
Um, it's weird because for me, it's kind of almost the other way around, right? So, like, just to give a little bit of background on my gender, because it's sharing time. I identified as a cis lesbian when I came out the gate at 18, and then slowly that morphed into being I was a non-binary person who is attracted to women and non-binary people, so like a non-binary bisexual by technicality kind of. And then like I found the two dudes that I think are cute, and then I was like, okay, I don't know if I needed to do this to confirm my bisexual card, but cool, right? And then the more I learned about history and the more that I actually understood what ancestor lineages feel like in the body, the more I was able to actually go, oh no, I'm a dyke. The whole experience, right? The wearing menswear 95% of the time and then occasionally feeling like a skirt, dyke history. The whole, like, mostly I'm attracted to women, but like if you're non-binary, I don't care. And like there's two dudes who like keep their beards well enough that like I will absolutely smooch them, dyke history, right? Like the whole like is dykedom a form of womanhood? Is it a non-binary gender expression? Is it both? Is it just an undiscovered form of womanhood, or does it fit neatly into like cis womanness? Probably not. But like that whole like weird nebulous cloud deal, dyke history. And so it's just like weird because for me, the more connected I've gotten with an ancestor practice, and the more I've actually been able to find my gender and sexuality in this, like, because now I can go back into the history books and look at pictures of dykes from the 80s, dykes from the 90s, dykes from the 60s and 70s, and be like, oh, it's my aunt. It's not like my aunt in quotation marks, right? But yeah, and so coming into these binaries in occultism and my very long meandering road to it, I've just known that it's a symbol that we use to help lay people understand a very complicated topic since day one. Like the idea that it would, like, yeah, of course, the sun and moon thing in alchemy is not actually about like being a cis man and a cis lady. The sun and moon thing is alchemy. It is obviously about active and passive principle. And ultimately, like they're the same thing and no thing. And there's a secret third and fourth option. You only put two dots down when you start because you can't comprehend the entire thing. So you start with two dots, right? um, and so it's the same thing with the mass. The first time that I read through the mass or was in a mass and they had the priest and priestess, I was like, oh, the priest is the ego and the priestess is a symbol of the ineffable. So if we really wanted to do this right, the priestess would actually be a giant ineffable pile of void goo. But we have to make do with human forms because we haven't figured out how to break into the 11th dimension yet.
That's like that old joke from the Star Trek conventions where I think Marina Sirtis, who played Deanna Troi, got asked once, why is it that all the aliens are always humanoid in Star Trek? And she replied, well, as soon as we start auditioning non-humanoid actors, that'll change.
She is awesome. That whole era of Star Trek is my jam. I think that the the question of like how does my sex and gender inform my practice? Well, I've already mentioned before about how I came into heathenry and there was a really strict gender binary on what magic you should do. And it really fucked with my head for a bit when I was because this I became pagan back in 04, 06, 07. I first ran into Freya come get me, I think 08, 09. So before she would teach me save, she said, you have to go to this uh, meetup where you talk about sex and gender and get your shit straight. Har, har, har. Uh, I was like, okay, but fucking why? Why can't you just teach me save? You'll figure it out. And then I sat in the middle of that and realized how much I had actually been struggling with my gender and my sexuality and everything. And it was like, oh, because I knew about the larger currents in heathenry at the time weren't very accepting of men or AMAB folks practicing save because it's a woman's thing and it's a a queer person's thing. Okay. And I had to kind of get through some of my Catholic baggage on that and some of my overculture baggage on that. And once I got a couple of these meetings under my belt and realized, oh, I really don't conform as much as I thought I did, and I really like for those who haven't seen my face, like it's a face full of beard, and I do conform to a lot of masculine stereotypes about what a man should look like. But I started really understanding myself very differently as Freya put me through this, what I recognize in the rearview mirror now as an initiation. And so once I opened up to that, then I could open up to the queer ancestors, the Erogi, which are the spiritual specialist ancestors, as I call them, the powerful ones, and then the Thavur, which are the powerful queer ancestors, generally speaking, as I call them. And it was like this unfolding process I had to go through in order to access Scythe to begin with. And then realizing that Odin had to go through a similar thing, and I went, oh well, fuck, okay. So my gender and my sexuality have kind of been just like sometimes baggage, sometimes along for the ride, sometimes the point. And they've radically shifted since I became heathen. And they've radically enmeshed themselves in ways that I never expected when I first became heathen. So complicated answer, but there you go.
I once I realized I had a sexuality, I knew I was bisexual. However, at that point I was Catholic, and so it was not an acceptable thing. And so I figured, well, if I was bisexual, I would, just stick to dating guys if I ever decided to date, which I eventually did. And it was just kind of a non-issue. I knew I was attracted to multiple genders, but I didn't think that it would be allowable within my faith at that time. And then gender was always a bit of a challenge or struggle for me personally. I was very masculine presenting in junior high and high school. I got asked a lot of times if I was a lesbian because people thought I was a dyke. And I just kind of was like, people would ask if I was a lesbian and I would say no. My parents asked and I said no. I did not ever explicitly say that I was bisexual because I didn't feel like it would be acceptable or palatable to the people asking. And then when I met my ex-husband when I was 20, and we started dating, and some of my friends at the time, my guy friends at the time, would tell me that I was not female, that I was not a woman, I was definitely not feminine enough. And although I had never had an issue with being gendered as male, I did have an issue with being told that I wasn't female. that I wasn't a woman. And so then I kind of switched into exploring after a while. It was quite a while. I switched into exploring some more feminine aspects, and realized that I enjoyed and I could celebrate some of that part of myself as well. I kind of identify as genderqueer, gender fluid, but it is still something that I struggle with on an acceptance level. I don't usually identify as trans, though I do celebrate, well, so I ritualize the Trans Day of Remembrance every year. That is for me a very important day on the calendar in my spiritual practice. I would say, as Cabra said, the ancestors really helped them figure out who they were. My current ancestor work has been very powerful with the queer ancestors. Sarenth was the first person I came upon who had a specific term for powerful queer ancestors, as well as powerful queer spiritual specialist ancestors. And it's been more obvious recently how active and loud my powerful queer ancestors are, and how Sarenth is like yucking it up. I know all of my ancestors are loud.
We want circus peanuts. We want circus peanuts. Feed
To be
us
fair,
taffy.
it's not just my queer ancestors that want circus peanuts. But yes, all of my ancestors are loud. But my queer ancestors have a lot to say, and not just the queer spiritual specialist ancestors. And so the more I explore my practice and the more it grows and the more my connections to my ancestors grow, that self-acceptance and self-realization comes ever closer, I think. Like I said, I've never doubted my sexuality. That's always been kind of obvious. I just didn't think it was socially or at the time religiously acceptable. So I kept it on the down low. But my gender, it has always been such a confusing thing personally. And part of that is, I think, an issue of acceptance. Because there have been people very close to me in my life who the idea of non-binary or gender fluid or genderqueer is a concept that they don't really know how to handle. And so I'm still on that path of exploration. But I will say that those specific ancestors have been a lot louder lately. And so that's highlighted that part of my path. Go ahead, Snow.
Okay, so it's my turn. Your turn. Who's talking?
You unmuted. Go for it.
All right. Small side note, shout out to Christina Queen, King of Sweden, cross-dresser, some kind of bisexual and or lesbian, had an occult library, abdicated the throne to go study grimoires and hang out with her girlfriend.
Wow.
We remember you.
That's awesome. What year was she?
Oh, let me Wikipedia it real quick. Moment of transparency.
It's all good. That's
Christina.
So yeah, well,
Queen of Snow. Christina was the king of Sweden. They say they have her as the queen. She was the king. She abdicated in 1654. She was born in 1632.
nice.
Right?
That's awesome. You know.
yeah, for myself, a lot of this is all kind of interwoven. So I started looking into pagan stuff and occult stuff in my preteens. I also started thinking about sex and gender in my preteens. And so kind of going through all the phases of trying to be subversive and seeing what was acceptable and what wasn't. And, getting into David Bowie and Alice Cooper at the same time I was reading LaVey's Satanic Bible, at the same time I was looking into Norse mythology and all these kinds of things all kind of interwove for me. So then by the time I was sort of properly considering myself pagan, I kind of knew I was bi anyways, even if I wasn't going around telling everyone I was bi. But then I think as I've gotten more comfortable in my practice and more established in my practice over time, I've also been able to accept myself and start talking about being non-binary and being gender fluid. So sort of, I think one of the biggest things there that was kind of interesting was, so as part of the Gothic Heathen group that I'm a member of, after a certain period of time, you can undergo parental divination, where you're sort of the gods that are considered to have created a part of your soul and to sort of watch over you, divine for you, and sort of revealed. Other traditions have sort of similar or comparable things. And it was interesting that I underwent that and came out with two mothers. And so that kind of felt like something of a statement in and of itself, sort of leaving that with Eartha and Epona. But I also think that the fact that that was just sort of given to me as the answer of the reading, very sort of matter-of-factly, also spoke to the integrity of the group and the inclusivity of the group, that they weren't there going, oh, this must be a faulty reading because there should be a male and a female sort of presenting deity here. But it was just, no, we got Eartha and we got Epona. Here are your two mothers. Congrats.
That's awesome.
Whereas I know I've seen lots of heathens sort of explore similar concepts and sort of go, oh, well, Odin and Frigg, or Thor and Sif, or something like that. And they need this idea of, or they feel that they need this idea of a masc presenting deity and a femme presenting deity, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, a good chunk of the gods that I follow cross a lot of gender and sexuality binaries. I mean, Othin, Freya, um, Loki, of course, Angrboda as well, especially depending on what depiction of her you're looking at. I use her, but her, they, them, occasionally he, as they come to me. Um, I think too sometimes we can get so I think you touched on this and I appreciate you doing so. We can get so bogged down in it has to look like this that the whole spectrum of the rainbow is completely occluded because we're looking for red or blue. And I think that our communities are a lot healthier for it when we can embrace the whole fucking rainbow and not just one or two colors. And not just from a perspective of inclusivity for its own sake, but in terms of respecting the whole of divinity and having relationships with them. It really cuts everything off at the knees if your inclusivity stops for every for human beings or for you know I can't tell you how many gender fluid spirits I've run into that are just they didn't have to think about this. They didn't have to ponder this in a group somewhere like I did. They're just naturally, unabashedly queer. And I fucking love that. I wouldn't be able to appreciate that if I didn't go through the things I went through, but there you go. If you're looking for all the Huldra folk to only look like big, buxom, half-naked women with a hole in their back, that's probably what you're going to try and see. You're not going to see the little people. You're not going to see, the trolls who doggedly, in many cases, do not conform to gender roles at all. If there's such a galaxy of expression out there that we cut ourselves off from when it's just the gender binary, when it's just the sexuality binary, there's only an acceptable one or two, right? Well, there's this entire galaxy of beings out there, and we're part of them.
I mean, I think the interesting thing, and a sort of colleague wrote a blog post about this, so we might actually sort of see about getting that in the episode description or something, was that in terms of your theology, um, if you subscribe to a theology where the gods aren't restricted by physical body, then that's really going to impact the questions around sex when it comes to the gods, because they are appearing in ways that we can comprehend and appear in ways that make themselves sort of comprehensible and relatable for us, but they're not restricted to those ways. And so they don't have these physical forms. They're just sort of adopting physical forms for one reason or another, one context or another, one devotee or another. And so then that's really going to impact ideas of sort of sexuality and gender when it comes to the divine there, which I think is really interesting to sort of think about. And then another thought I was just thinking of there, just to squeeze this in, and then Cabra can talk. Going back to Sacred Gender, the book that I was reading, she was making a point in that book, Ariana Serpentine was making a point in that book about how there's almost this sort of dismissive attitude towards what gods are queer and what gods are not queer, and what gods are masculine and what gods are feminine, and what gods trans people should be worshipping, as if there's this kind of regimented way of going about it, which actually kind of becomes a problem in and of itself, because you're there saying, oh, well, we're really inclusive of queer people and LGBTQ plus people, but if you're trans, you should probably be going and worshipping Loki. And then if you're cishet, then you can join us over here worshipping Thor. And she was saying that actually she never really felt much of a vibe with worshipping Loki, and didn't feel that just because she was trans that she should. Like, that's kind of limiting and a problem in its own way, whilst sort of coming through in the guise of trying to be accepting and inclusive.
Yeah. Like I did not include Frigg in the gods where I have experienced them as non-binary or ambiguously gendered, because Frigg comes through exceptionally gendered for me, and I have not experienced her any other way. That doesn't mean that it precludes that, and I do not want to put my gods in a box like that, because it's not my place. But if we are going to be inclusive of the whole spectrum of human behaviors, some of them are going to conform to different stereotypes and some aren't. If this goddess presents as a weaving goddess and that's all she wants to do, then trying to take her out of that context isn't respectful to her agency, right? I yeah, that's it's kind of like folks who want to soften the blow when it comes to, say, Ares or Tyr or Odin in his war aspects. Like, no, these are gods who are in some fashion or another red in tooth and claw, and it doesn't help anything to soften that image of violence. And we can understand our gods having aspects beyond, pop culture paganism depictions of what Ares or Tyr or Odin look like, without unnecessarily shackling them to new stereotypes or taking their myths or their beings out of context. I don't know. I don't know quite how to parse this correctly, but
The way that I've experienced this, and this is just my experience, it doesn't have to be true for anybody else, is for me, the gods are fundamentally relational, right? Like they're simultaneously like conscious in and of themselves
right.
for me, but for that consciousness is a relational consciousness. It's a relationship between a community of humans, a biome, and aspects of human society. So for example, when we go talk about Babylon, we're talking about a relationship between a community of Thelemites, those of us who have accepted the law, and the earth. It's in the creed. I believe in one earth, the mother of us all, mystery of mystery, and her name Babylon. We're not subtle about it, right? And so our relationship with the earth is also very deeply entrenched in this question of women's liberation. The reason why Babylon is depicted as a sex worker is partially because that's what happened in Revelations. But if you look at all of the sort of additional texts that kind of end up becoming part of her like pseudo canon, if you can even say that she has one, there's a lot about independence and mysticism and like wholeness, right? And I think that for Crowley and for the Enochian guy, John Dee, and for a lot of other people, Babylon is a sex worker because that's the only way they could think of a woman making her own money, and like being in charge of her own business and her children, right? And is this like the best way to frame this? No, but it is what the culture had available, and she's going to grow and change with us. We're going to get weirder and gayer every year because it is our divine will. I'm calling it now. 200 years from now, it's going to be weirder and gayer. It's going to be great. Can't wait to be an ancestor for that one. Yes, I can. I take it back. I take it back. It was a turn of phrase. I'm only human. But as we get weirder and gayer and people continue to accept the law, because I'd like to believe that Thelema is going to continue on for quite some time, maybe not to become a dominant world religion, but in some strand, Babylon's coming with us. And because she's a relational consciousness, as we get weirder and gayer in our relationship to women's liberation and sex work and childbearing and mysticism, she's also going to get weirder and gayer. And I see even on the margins of the heathen community, as someone who's not in that practice, I love what people are doing in trying to reframe and re-understand and renegotiate. What about Loki's queerness? What about Odin's queerness? Right? And I think that it's good that these renegotiations are happening because it shows it's a living thread, and that relation, right, is there.
Right. It's really interesting, like as somebody that worships Odin and understands themselves as an Othinson, how many people will come up to me and say, "Hey, I banged your dad." And just from that experience of, okay, I don't have that relationship. I'm glad you and he enjoy that. Cool. Queer the shit out of whatever spaces you're in. But that specific relationship, I can't do it. I won't do it. And he has shown me a great deal of patience and a great deal of pushing me to grow as a person, whether it's got to do with my spirituality, my perspective on things, my sexuality, gender, all of it. My life wouldn't happen the way it has if it hadn't been through his hands first. Like, I wouldn't have made contact with Freya. I wouldn't have met Loki. Everything that's come about since becoming a heathen has really come through his hands. And arguably, you look back over the long spans of my life where he wasn't supposedly there, I can see his influence in the rearview mirror. And I think that in a lot of ways, we're going to see this interweaving of our gods in relationality in different ways. And what I'm really nervous about right now that's trending in a lot of the circles on the not just on the margins, but is that our gods are only going to occupy X or Y positions because that is palatable. Like, I don't lose my queerness because I'm a father. Odin doesn't lose his queerness because he's my father. I just don't have that relationship with him. And that's a perspective that I'm hoping becomes more included in the communities, because there's this really weird dichotomy right now where either you're fucking the gods or you're chaste. And I know that unto itself is a binary, but travel with me.
Can I
Go
can I
ahead.
push back on something real quick that
Please.
you said? I think that you implied that you're having a father-son relationship with Othin is not queer.
No, it's
But
queer. It's just
I was
not.
about to be like,
No, it's
that's your
queer.
mentor.
It's queer, but it's not sexual.
There we go.
That's
Just want to make sure I was following.
no, it is. we can't make space for people who have these relationships with their gods as children or what have you, children or aunts and uncles and things like that, if the only options we make available to them are you're chaste or you're fucking your god. It makes it really hard to integrate these ideas, I would argue, in a healthier way, because it precludes a whole spectrum of queerness and relationality here in meat space too.
I think one thing that is a massive influence on that, though, is sort of the broader culture at large, and the fact that in the Christian, post-Christian Western world, people have really, really weird issues with sex.
No.
And so
Really?
everything is, as a reaction to that, you see a very sanitized puritanical approach at one extreme, where anything with boobs or anything with a phallus is an issue. And at the other extreme, you get the hypersexualization and the fetishization of things. And both of those are equally problematic. Because you see a lot of this with sort of pagans in the broader community producing art of deities and such, where they're often either completely desexing goddesses as some kind of reactionary move, or going the other way and sort of the edgy dark god, sexy goddess thing, or what have you. And so it's very unhealthy and is very binary. And so then you're seeing that in terms of how people are approaching the gods in their worship in these relationships. What you were saying there about, chasteness or the complete opposite extreme. Because that makes me think back to when we had Morpheus Ravenna on, and I said to them, I sort of said, well, I feel sort of compelled to ask, what are your thoughts on Morrigan fitting into that sort of dark, sexy goddess thing? And Morpheus said, well, I think it says a lot about the people in Pagandom at large, that the only way they can comprehend a powerful female is by making her have an hourglass figure, wear very little clothing, and that's the only way they can understand this goddess. That says a lot about them and their views on women, that Anne Morrigan can't appear any other way for them. And sort of similarly, when you see things about, Freya as a goddess of fertility, she's either practically wearing an armored bikini on some of these statues on Etsy, or looks like one of the nuns from The Sound of Music at the other extreme, because people are being very reactionary against that. And so there's no sort of healthy middle ground there. To the point where I've seen sort of in Egyptian polytheistic circles, people really struggle with talking about the creation myth, where the world was formed from the seed of Atum, where, emerging from the creation coming from Atum's phallus, and the sort of powerful creative imagery in there. But because, all of a sudden we're talking penises and ejaculation, people make it very mundane and very earthly. And then it's almost pornographic, and don't bring that up unless you're going to censor the whole thing.
So the side wound of Christ. Promise I'm going somewhere with this. So one of the things that happens when you dig really deep into Christian mysticism, and I'm going to go ahead and shout out Mary Magdalene Stan on Instagram for making me a convert to this concept and truly being one of the finest, most loving Christians I've ever seen on the internet. Like, hope you're having a great day. So side wound of Christ. So because Christ has to redeem everything, and as Cynthia Bourgeault says, that which is not lived is not redeemed, it means that Christ, coming from a mystic perspective in some of these different lineages, is thought of to be all the genders at once, kind of. And the way that people in the Middle Ages got real weird about feminizing him was the side wound. And so the side wound sits in this really weird place and is coming back in a small way as being like a yonic symbol, and also the blood of Christ that comes through that has Eucharistic imagery. And because medieval people really needed mother, right, to be in Jesus as well, sometimes it comes out as milk, as like the side wound of Christ is the milk upon which we feed our faith. And so it's really weird because it's like, it's a hole, it bleeds, it makes milk. You can catch it into a cup and make it a gruel, which is some sapphic imagery. And it's all kind of weirdly erotic, but also, especially when Thomas like sticks his finger in there, like that's a metaphor for something, I'm sure. But it there's so much of the imagery that is like about eroticism and motherhood and love and divinity without being just out and out sexual. And like, yeah, let's bring that back. It's a weird and very tender place, you know? And one thing that I'm interested in seeing with Babylon especially is that Babylon is the result of a lot of dudes who can't imagine an independent woman without her being like not just a sex worker, but like our depictions of her as a sex worker don't actually come from an understanding of sex work or contact with sex workers, right? And so one of the things I'm looking forward to doing is asking the question, if we take it very seriously that Babylon resonates with sex workers and we look at like the wide variety of like queerness and sex work that she could resonate with and that we could include in our like iconography of her, how does that change from the traditional, you know, I'm bathing in blood and I'm wearing a very silly little cover up and I've got a big chalice kind of thing that's going on.
Oh, the Frank Frazetta style paintings. Gotcha.
Yeah, something like that. Which, like, don't get me wrong. I'm gay for it. I'm into it. It's fine. But it can't be the beginning, middle, and end of how we depict her.
Right. I wanted to put that on with regards to Freya. Like, she can be an incredibly sexual goddess, but she doesn't need to be a Frank Frazetta painting in every depiction of her. And I really don't experience her as a Frank Frazetta painting anyway. But the tethering of goddesses, especially because patriarchy, to can we fuck it is really disturbing. But also, there's so much more expression of relationship that you could have. Why is that it? Like, come on, be imaginative, you motherfuckers.
I want to see Odin be somebody's drag mother one day. It's going to be amazing.
I mean, but people push back against that kind of like imagery making. I'm like, I had to point out, like, he literally became a woman so he could learn save. Drop your fucking prejudices, you pricks. Like,
It's also a way for us to look back on our own history and have like a real moment of it, you know? One of the questions that I would ask about to modern heathens who are trying to investigate like your own queerness with your relationship to your gods is like, we are not out of the shadow of the first wave of the AIDS pandemic in the 90s.
no.
You know, and a lot of us are in some way orphaned because we were supposed to have mentors. We were supposed to have choirs. We were supposed to have, you know, groups like the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence running around, and they're still around, thank God. But like, it's an interesting question of like, if we want to look at what happened and we want to continue making a mythical history and a hagiography and a memorialization of these things, which I firmly believe that we should do, how do we do that as people of faith while also being in that faith, right?
Yeah. The way that I thread that particular one is in a similar way to my ancestors that might have died of sickness or illness and a plague. They were powerful and beautiful people in their own right. Some of the Ergi and the Thavur, as I understand them, are people who died to the AIDS epidemic. And I think that we also need to decouple, and this is like a wider discussion on disability, health, and all that. We need to decouple powerful from healthy, powerful from what we look at as body norms. Like the ugly laws disappeared not that long ago. I think what, the 80s?
I'm sorry. Literacy moment. What's an ugly law?
In at least the United States, there were these things called ugly laws, which basically like folks with Down syndrome, folks who had physical deformities could not be seen in public. So when people say, oh, well, you know, we just didn't see kids with autism and Down syndrome. Yeah, that's because they were literally fucking shut up places. Like, and this is also integral to the history of queerness because being out and proud also meant that a lot of more folks who had physical deformities were being out and loud and proud. So like when you saw the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, I want to say 94 or 92, I can't recall. But the point being is that we're not that far out of the AIDS epidemic on the one hand, ugly laws on the other. And so what was it, the 80s when women could finally get their own credit card without having to be married or have a father co-sign, I want to say.
The 80s or the 70s. I don't remember for sure.
So we're not that far off from a lot of these really terrible institutional policies around what 1990. Thank you, Cabra, for the ADA. So we're not that far off from all of these terrible institutional policies around who can be in public and how. And the DSM, I want to say 3, used to categorize homosexuality as a mental illness. And that was removed, I believe, in 67 or thereabouts. Don't quote me on that. So the institutionalization of otherness writ large into public policy formats, at least here in the United States, is a recent development. We haven't had generations of people being out, proud, and queer. We're it.
I mean, over here on this side of the Atlantic, in the UK, we had something called Section 28, which made it essentially illegal for teachers in education to be seen, quote unquote, promoting, what was the wording? Something like alternative living arrangements. So it was essentially if you were talking either hypothetically or literally about a child having a father and a father, or a mother and a mother, or something like that, you could lose your job. And so it was basically sort of essentially illegal for teachers to talk about homosexuality, bisexuality, transsexuality, etc., within the workplace. So to students, to pupils, to children, and that was in place until 2003.
Fuck.
So, you know.
I don't know how to make the faces into sounds, but the faces are happening.
So, yeah, we're not that far out of these things. I mean, Stonewall wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things.
It was not.
69.
Yeah. And so then these are the attitudes and views people are bringing it with them when they come into pagan spaces, occult spaces, polytheistic religions. Yeah. To bring the tone up slightly, one thing that I do appreciate is in Mortellus' work, because Mortellus is very much non-binary. They refer to ancestors using they them pronouns.
I remember we
Yeah.
talked about this with them.
Yeah, because I that really jumped out at me across both their books that I'd read, and is something that I've been sort of working on and sort of embracing myself in my own practice. Because I mean, I can't remember their exact phrasing. Listeners can go back and listen to the episode. But I believe the point they made was essentially, well, they're no longer limited to physical form, and depending on when and where they were living at the time, they may very well have felt that they were non-binary or trans, and it was just socially unacceptable for them to live that out. Or their having been so might just have been sort of wiped from the records afterwards because that would have been socially unacceptable. So who's to say? And so to them, it made sense and was perfectly reasonable to use they them pronouns for ancestors.
That was
I
episode
can
1.
only think of a few edge cases where I would not do that, but they are edge cases, and it has to do with are you allowed to use the word instrumentalization if it's being done by individuals and not by institutions? No. It's about the hagiography of certain trans ancestors. So like Candy Darling has become a folk saint, right? Gets a hagiography. And so if I was ever talking about her, considering everything that she went through to get she heard in public, I would not refer to her as they them. But yeah, aside from a couple of edge cases that have a lot more to do with like hagiography and social standing and things like that, fine by me.
Episode 125 is when we had Mortellus on. The episode is Do a Ghost's Experience Cringe, an interview with Mortellus. Just for folks who are looking for that.
We were on such a roll for titles.
We were. I do kind of I appreciate you bringing the reason I brought all that up wasn't just to depress the atmosphere, but it was also to like really like emphasize to folks, you're the living ancestors now. Fucking live like it. Like the ball is in your court, and your ancestors may not have had an option. I think you just touched on this. Your ancestors may not have had the option to go. They might not have had the words. That's the word. That's the thing I was going for. They might not have had the verbiage when they were alive. Because if your whole existence is a very small box and you either fit in it or you don't have a lot of language around expression and identity. And maybe your ancestors' joy now is getting to watch you flourish and express yourself, and they get to express and flourish themselves. Your healing can be their healing.
So, do we feel that your healing can be their healing as a good ending note for this discussion as we head towards wrapping up? Does anyone have any other final thoughts?
No, I think that's a good place.
Cool. So, Emily, if people want to hear your things as you are healing for their healing, where can people find your works as you are a living ancestor to be?
They can find my works at streakingfate.wordpress.com, where I occasionally update my blog.
Go for it, Sarenth.
All right. If for some reason you want to read my words or hear my voice some more, you can find me at sarenth.wordpress.com. You can find my Patreon at patreon.com/Sarenth Odinson. Odinson, not backslash, excuse me, slash Sarenth Odinson. You can find my YouTube channel, which is just Sarenth Odinson. You can find Three Pagans on Tap, where we drink and talk about animism, polytheism, and whatever else comes across our brains. We are a once a month live podcast, videocast on YouTube. Three Pagans on Tap. And so, yes, you can find me in all those wonderful, beautiful places.
You can find me at snowthegoth.com or linktree/snowthegoth. The podcast overall, aroundgrandfatherfire.com, patreon.com/aroundgrandfatherfire. We have a Discord server. There are links there. You don't have to be a Patreon member to join. It's a lot of fun. Members from the Kindling tier upwards can come join us live in the Zoom calls as we record all of these. Cabra, for the final time on the show as a co-host, where can people find your wonderful things?
You can find me at steelcitywitch.com, where I have a blog that gets updated when I feel like it and I have something to say. Similarly, you can find me on YouTube under Steel City Witch. That also gets updated when I have something to say. And I am also hanging out again with the Stars Dance Mystery School. If you'd like to actually learn to be a level 0 Star Wizard yourself, feel free to come over and pester us with your questions. For what I think are actually very affordable fees, considering what some of these courses go through. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I will be on the Discord, and if they ever get me to nail down my schedule, I'm happy to come back on for a future episode. So much love to everyone.
Much love to you too, Cabra. Thank you very much, and thank you for all of your time and your work, your wisdom, and your workings. And I think that's going to do us for this episode. I want to thank you all for joining us, and see you next time around the fire.